When coordination turns into performance. Coordination is one of those words that sounds clean and responsible. It suggests adults in a room sharing information, making sure the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. It suggests fewer mistakes, fewer surprises, less waste. In many places, coordination is treated as an unqualified good, but the lived experience of coordination is often messier. It has a texture: calendars filling, message threads multiplying, dashboards glowing, progress updates repeating, and the quiet sense that the work is happening somewhere else, later, after the meeting about the meeting. There is a human stake here that is easy to miss because it hides inside ordinary routines. Coordination changes how people spend attention. It changes what gets rewarded. It changes what feels safe to say, what feels risky to admit, and what feels necessary to display. In other words, it shapes agency and dignity in the day-to-day. So the scope today is modest. Not to condemn meetings, not to praise solitude, not to treat visibility as either virtue or vice. The scope is to look at how coordination drifts, how it can move from making us aligned to making us merely visible, and how that drift is rarely accidental. It is usually a system showing us what it truly values. Coordination becomes signaling rather than alignment when the system rewards being seen coordinating more than it rewards shared understanding, consentful commitments, and accountable follow-through. That sentence is about responsibility more than it is about efficiency. It is about the humane impact of the tools and routines we treat as normal. In what follows, I will claim a few specific things: that coordination relies on proxies, that proxies become targets under measurement, and that when those targets dominate, people adapt in predictable ways that can harm dignity, agency, and trust. I will not claim that there is a pure form of coordination untouched by power or anxiety. I will not claim that the problem is bad people. I will not claim that the solution is simply fewer meetings or better software. Those are often surface adjustments. The deeper question is what we choose to treat as evidence of alignment, and what kinds of human costs we accept as externalities when we do. The question then is not, are we coordinating? The question is, what does our system permit, constrain, and ignore, and what does that teach people to perform? To talk clearly about this, we need a few terms. Not specialized terms, plain ones, because most of this happens in plain sight. First, coordination. Coordination is the act of arranging work among people so that efforts fit together. Coordination is not the work itself, it is the work about the work, deciding who does what, when, with which dependencies, and what happens when plans change. A simple example is two people carrying a table. They coordinate by agreeing on direction, pace, and when to turn. Without that, they bump into door frames and bruise shins. Second, alignment. Alignment is shared understanding plus compatible commitments. It includes a common picture of what done means, what constraints matter, and who is responsible for which outcomes. If coordination is the motion of people and tasks, alignment is the shared map that makes the motion coherent. A common workplace example: two teams may attend the same planning meeting, yet still disagree about what success looks like. They coordinated in calendar time, but they did not align in meaning. Third, signaling. Signaling is behavior designed to produce an impression, usually an impression of competence, diligence, loyalty, urgency, or control. Signaling is not always dishonest. It can be a survival response to uncertainty. When outcomes are hard to measure, people use visible effort as evidence. The trouble begins when the signal becomes more valuable than the reality it is meant to represent. Fourth, proxy. A proxy is a stand-in measure used when the real thing is hard to observe directly. We cannot easily measure clarity, so we count the number of documents. We cannot easily measure shared understanding, so we count meeting attendance. We cannot easily measure responsible follow-through, so we count how quickly someone responds to messages. Proxies are not inherently wrong, they are often necessary. Now we can state a simple chain that many systems fall into. 1. We want alignment. 2. Alignment is hard to observe. 3. We measure a proxy for alignment. 4. The proxy becomes a target. 5. The target reshapes behavior. 6. The behavior produces the appearance of alignment while eroding its substance. This is where intent and impact separate. The intent of a coordination ritual, a daily stand-up, a weekly update, a project dashboard is often reasonable. Reduce surprises, surface blockers, share context, make commitments visible. The impact can be different. Increase anxiety, reward performative certainty, punish honest ambiguity, and displace time from the work that coordination was meant to support. Consider a plain example, a recurring status meeting. In intent, it is a place to sync. In impact, it can become a stage. People learn what gets praised, being on top of things, having no blockers, moving fast. And they learn what gets punished. I don't know yet. We need to revisit assumptions. This is taking longer because we are being careful. When those punishments are subtle, eye rolls, impatience, fewer invitations, they still teach. Coordination also has a social dimension that we often undername. It is not just information transfer, it is a distribution of voice. It decides whose uncertainty is acceptable, whose time is interruptible, whose attention is treated as common property. A system can call itself coordinated while quietly granting agency to some and constant interruption to others. We should also name visibility, because it sits at the center of this drift. Visibility is the degree to which actions, progress, and decisions can be seen by others. Visibility can protect people by making commitments explicit, by preventing hidden overwork, by revealing bottlenecks. Visibility can also expose people by turning partial work into a performance, by punishing those whose labor is less legible, by rewarding those who speak well rather than those who build carefully. So, when does coordination become signaling rather than alignment? It happens when visible participation substitutes for shared understanding, when speaking substitutes for deciding, when documenting substitutes for doing, when attendance substitutes for consent, when speed of response substitutes for responsible judgment. The question is not whether we use proxies. We will. The question is whether we remember they are proxies. And what happens when we forget? Because forgetting is not an intellectual error alone. It is a structural one. Under pressure, the proxy starts to feel safer than the truth. You can show up. You can post an update. You can reply quickly. You can look coordinated. Alignment, on the other hand, requires risk. Admitting confusion, renegotiating commitments, naming trade-offs, sometimes saying no, sometimes slowing down. And systems, especially measured systems, often treat risk as noise. If we hold those definitions, coordination, alignment, signaling, proxy, we can examine the drift without blaming individuals for adapting to incentives. People adjust to what they think the system will reward and what it will punish. That is not cynicism. That is learned constraint. The drift from alignment to signaling often begins with a genuine need. As a group grows, the cost of just talk to each other rises. Dependencies multiply. Context fragments. Mistakes become expensive. Leaders and peers alike feel the pressure to reduce uncertainty, to keep the machine from stalling. Under scale, coordination becomes an infrastructure. But infrastructure has a particular tendency. It becomes its own purpose. A system built to support the work starts to define what the work is. The calendar becomes a moral ledger. The dashboard becomes the story. The update becomes the truth. Here is the first tension: scale versus care. Care in this context is not sentiment. It is the willingness to treat people as more than interchangeable nodes. It is the willingness to notice that not all tasks have the same risk, not all delays have the same meaning, not all voices have the same safety to speak. Care requires context. Scale resists context. Scale prefers standardization. One meeting format, one reporting cadence, one definition of done, one set of fields that must be filled. Standardization can reduce confusion. It can also erase the very conditions that make responsible work possible. When the same reporting rules apply to exploratory research and to routine operations, the system quietly demands certainty, where uncertainty is honest. People learn to manufacture confidence. That manufacturing is signaling. It is how individuals survive in systems that punish ambiguity. Now consider a second tension: automation versus agency. Many coordination tools promise to reduce friction by automating reminders, enforcing workflows, generating summaries, and producing metrics. The intent is often to free people from administrative load. But automation also sets a default. It decides what is normal, what is late, what is blocked, what needs escalation, what counts as participation. The tool becomes an authority, not because it is correct, but because it is convenient and visible. Agency then shifts. People begin to manage the tool's expectations, not the work's realities. A typical pattern emerges. If the system marks you behind, you update the system. If the system requires a field, you fill it, even if the answer is meaningless. If the system surfaces a metric, You optimize the metric. Not because you worship the metric, but because the metric now mediates your reputation. This leads to the third tension, metrics versus dignity. Metrics are a kind of compression. They reduce a complex reality into a number or status. Compression is useful. It is also a form of loss. When we measure coordination, we often measure what is easy: meeting attendance, number of updates posted, response time, tasks moved across a board, documents produced, comments left. These are visible and countable. They are also easily detached from meaning. Dignity enters when we ask, what does it do to a person to be evaluated primarily through compressions of their attention? What does it do when their worth is inferred from their speed, their availability, their performative confidence, their constant visibility? In such environments, the safest posture is often always on, not necessarily doing the highest value work, just always legible. This is where incentives turn good intentions into harm. A manager may sincerely want better coordination, so they add a daily check-in. Then they add a shared tracker. Then they ask for weekly written updates. Then they request a summary for their own manager. Each step in isolation seems reasonable. The hidden change is cumulative. Attention is redirected from building to reporting, and because reporting is visible, it begins to outcompete building in the status economy. Two failure modes commonly appear, one at the level of the individual, one at the level of the system. Individual level failure mode, performative certainty. When people believe that admitting uncertainty will cost them reputation, access, or safety, they stop naming uncertainty. They speak in confident verbs. They report progress as a smooth line. They hide risk until it becomes unavoidable. This is not always intentional deception. It is often a learned adaptation. If I show doubt, I will be treated as the doubt. The harm is straightforward. Decisions get made on false clarity. Small problems become large because they were never given early attention. And the person performing certainty experiences a quiet erosion of agency. They are not choosing what is true. They are choosing what is safe to display. System-level failure mode, proxy lock-in. Once an organization invests in a proxy, once it builds rituals, tools, and status hierarchies around it, it becomes costly to admit the proxy is inadequate. The system becomes dependent on its own measurement for coordination, so it doubles down: more dashboards, more reporting, more meetings to interpret the reports. This is how coordination overhead becomes self-protecting. The system treats the overhead as evidence of seriousness, and because the overhead is visible, it is easier to justify than the invisible work of building trust, clarifying responsibilities, and reducing unnecessary dependencies. Under proxy lock-in, dissent becomes hard. If someone says, "This meeting is not helping," they are not just critiquing a meeting. They are threatening the proxy the system uses to feel in control. The system responds defensively, often without anyone intending to be defensive. And so coordination drifts, from aligning people to stabilizing the system's sense of itself. Notice how little malice is required. The drift can occur with the best intent. Intent is not impact. There is also a subtler paradox. Visibility can reduce trust. A system that demands constant proof of progress communicates a premise: people will not work unless watched. Even when no one says that out loud, the structure says it, and people feel what the structure says. Under that premise, visibility becomes a form of surveillance, even if it wears the language of collaboration. People then respond by controlling what is seen. Updates become curated, risks become delayed, work becomes shaped to look good rather than to be good. The system reads this as a need for more visibility, and the loop tightens. This is not just about meetings. Meetings are simply the most familiar stage for signaling. The deeper dynamic is the conversion of alignment into legibility. Legibility is valuable, but when legibility becomes the primary value, the system begins to confuse "can be seen" with "is real." That confusion is the soil in which performative coordination grows. When coordination becomes signaling, the consequences are rarely immediate explosions. They are usually second-order effects, gradual shifts in behavior and meaning that persist because they are rational responses to the environment. One consequence is attention fragmentation. Coordination rituals consume attention in small slices: check-ins, pings, follow-ups, clarifications, reclarifications. Each slice feels minor. The total becomes a lifestyle. People stop having uninterrupted time to think, and without time to think, they produce work that requires more coordination to fix. That is how overhead breeds more overhead. This fragmentation has a dignity cost. It trains people to treat their attention as externally owned, always available, always interruptible, always on call to demonstrate responsiveness. Agency narrows to respond quickly, even when responsible judgment would require time. A second consequence is the degradation of consent. In many coordination cultures, attendance is treated as consent. If you were in the room, you must agree. If you did not object in the moment, you must support the decision. But silence can mean many things. Lack of psychological safety, lack of context, fatigue, or the calculation that dissent will be punished. When coordination is performed publicly, the social cost of dissent rises. People learn to nod and then work around decisions later. That creates a strange split. The official narrative says alignment, while the actual work reveals misalignment. The system sees the misalignment and demands more coordination. The cycle continues. A third consequence is inequality of legibility. Not all work shows up well in proxies. Some labor is quiet and preventative. Quality checking, mentoring, maintaining tools, documenting decisions, de-escalating conflict, reducing risk, noticing edge cases. It may save the system from harm without producing a visible artifact. Meanwhile, some work is highly legible, presenting, summarizing, moving tasks, speaking confidently, generating visible activity. When coordination becomes signaling, legible work gains status, access, and reward. Illegible work becomes background noise. This produces a hidden cost and an excluded stakeholder. The excluded stakeholder is often the person downstream of mistakes. The user who experiences the bug, the client who bears the delay, the frontline worker who absorbs the confusion created upstream, the new team member who inherits undocumented decisions. They are affected by misalignment, but they are not in the meeting where alignment is performed. They do not receive the social benefits of being seen coordinating. They only receive the externality when coordination fails. The hidden cost is the moral injury of being made responsible without being given the means to be responsible. For example, imagine a person tasked with maintaining a critical system. They are asked to attend many coordination meetings, respond quickly to messages, and provide status updates. The proxies show that they are engaged, yet the time taken by those rituals reduces their capacity to do careful maintenance. If something breaks, accountability will fall on them because they are the named owner. The system has extracted visibility and then denied the conditions for care. This is a particular kind of harm, responsibility without agency. Another second-order effect is the normalization of performative urgency. When updates are frequent and public, people feel pressure to always report movement. But not all meaningful work moves quickly. Some work is about reducing uncertainty, exploring options, or waiting for constraints to change. In a signaling environment, waiting looks like failure, and careful thinking looks like slowness. So people create motion. They split tasks to show progress. They produce intermediate artifacts that look like deliverables. They prioritize what can be reported over what should be done. It also persists because it is contagious. If others are performing urgency, your calm realism looks like lack of commitment. Signaling creates its own cultural weather. Another consequence is story drift. As coordination becomes performance, the official story of the work becomes smoother than reality. Risks are softened. Dependencies are simplified. Ambiguities are treated as solvable by confidence. Over time, leadership and peers begin to make decisions based on the story, not the ground. When the ground eventually contradicts the story, the system treats it as a surprise, not as a consequence of incentives. Then it demands postmortems, accountability, and tighter reporting. Notice the loop again. The failure of the proxy is interpreted as the need for stronger proxies. There is also a relational consequence. Trust becomes conditional on visibility. In a humane environment, trust is not blind faith. It is a practical relationship built by consistent follow-through and honest communication, including honest uncertainty. In a signaling environment, trust becomes, I trust what I can see. That sounds reasonable, until you remember that what can be seen is often shaped by power, schedule, and personality. Some people are comfortable being visible, some are not. Some roles are built around visibility. Some roles are built around making visibility possible for others. When trust depends on visibility, those who are less visible, because they are remote, because they have caregiving constraints, because their work is deep and solitary, because their communication style is quiet, are treated as less trustworthy. Not through a declared judgment, but through fewer opportunities, fewer invitations, fewer chances to shape decisions. This is how coordination rituals can quietly become access gates. The trade-off is real. Without coordination, systems fragment. With coordination as signaling, systems centralize attention around performance. The cost is paid in meaning. People begin to associate working with being seen working. They begin to internalize the idea that their value is measured by responsiveness. They begin to treat relationships as channels for display. And yet the system can look healthy from the outside. The calendars are full. The dashboards are updated. The meetings are attended. The signal is loud. The question is, what is the signal covering? Often, it is covering the hardest work of alignment, making trade-offs explicit, naming harms and externalities, renegotiating commitments with consent, and accepting that uncertainty is not a moral failure, but a feature of complex work. When those hard tasks are replaced by performance, the system becomes brittle. It may move quickly, until it doesn't. It may appear aligned, until it faces a boundary condition the proxies were never designed to represent. And the people inside it learn to survive by becoming excellent at display. If we sit with this long enough, we may notice an uncomfortable truth. Signaling is not an alien corruption of coordination. Signaling is coordination under certain constraints. When people lack power, they signal more. When outcomes are uncertain, they signal more. When reputation is fragile, they signal more. When evaluation is frequent and shallow, they signal more. So the question, when does coordination become signaling, is also a question about what kinds of environments we build, what we reward, what we punish, what we can tolerate not knowing. There is no clean line. There are only patterns. One pattern is substitution, when participation substitutes for understanding. You can attend the meeting and still not know what you are committing to. You can nod along and still disagree privately. You can write the update and still be unclear about trade-offs. Coordination that does not produce shared understanding is mostly choreography. Another pattern is compulsion, when visibility substitutes for trust. If every step must be proven, then the system is saying that the work cannot be believed unless it is witnessed. That shapes identity. People become what they can prove, not what they can sustain. Another pattern is drift, when the proxy becomes the meaning. At first, the metric is a tool. Later, it becomes a language. Then it becomes a standard of worth. People begin to say, "We are doing well," meaning the numbers look good, even if the lived experience is exhaustion, confusion, or quiet resentment. The system calls this success because it can see it. There is a kind of humility in recognizing that alignment is expensive. It costs time, patience, and the willingness to let certain things remain messy, long enough to be understood. And it costs status, because honest alignment requires someone to say, "I don't think we agree," or "I'm not consenting to this commitment," or "This plan shifts harm onto someone not in this room." Those are not dramatic statements. They are ordinary statements in a mature system. If a system cannot bear them, then signaling will always outcompete alignment, because signaling is faster and safer. It is a way to appear cooperative without risking the friction of truth. So what do we do with this? Not a plan, not a checklist, just an orientation. We can pay attention to where coordination asks for visibility without granting agency. We can pay attention to where consent is assumed rather than invited. We can pay attention to where responsibility is assigned, but the conditions for responsible work are withheld. We can pay attention to the invisible stakeholders, the people who will bear the externalities of misalignment without being present to shape the decision. And we can pay attention to what our proxies are teaching us to value, because the system will tell the truth, not through what it says, but through what it permits, constrains, and ignores. If it permits constant interruption, it values immediacy over depth. If it constrains dissent, it values smoothness over accuracy. If it ignores invisible labor, it values performance over maintenance. The aim is not to eliminate signaling. Some signaling is unavoidable in human groups. The aim is to notice when signaling has become the dominant form of safety, when the cost of honesty has become too high, and then to let that noticing linger, not to rush toward a neat answer, because neat answers can be another form of performance, just to hold the question with enough precision that we can recognize it in our own routines. Is this coordination producing alignment, or is it producing legibility? Is it increasing shared understanding or increasing display? Is it distributing responsibility in a way that preserves agency, or distributing blame in a way that dissolves it? If we can hold those questions without immediate closure, we may begin to see the difference between a system that is busy and a system that is coherent. And we may begin to see the cost of mistaking one for the other. Name the cost, not just the benefit. Care is a constraint, not a sentiment.